Hello, and welcome to another episode of Historified. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Annie.
And on today's episode, we are going to be digging into the history of the Wilmeth Schoolhouse.
Yes. Oh, it's such a fun place.
And you look dressed for the part.
Yes.
You're ready to teach.
I'm in my teaching marm costume.
So, and you have a fun little
Yes, I have
brooch.
my little watch pin that when I look at it like this, it is 10 minutes to 1, which it should be because it still works.
So, and it's upside down, right?
It is
so
upside
if anybody
down.
were to look at it, it's upside down.
It'd be upside down for you, but when I flip it up like that, it tells me the time. So the Wilmeths are a really fun family, and we have a lot of information about that because one of their family members gave us a whole book on the Wilmeths. So this is one of the families that we do have a lot of information about. So let's start with J.B. and Nancy Wilmeth.
So, Joe Bryce, J.B. Wilmeth of Northeast Arkansas, led a wagon train of 3 families with 22 children, among them to Texas in 1845.
Kill me now.
It consisted of J.B. and Nancy, his wife, with their 10 plus 2 young nephews, his brother Frank Wilmeth and wife Miranda with their 6, and his good friend Jordan Strahan, did I pronounce that correctly? Mm-hmm. Thank you. With wife Nancy and 4 children. So is anybody doing math? Because that was a lot of numbers right there. Both Nancys had babies under a year old, and there were 8 heavy wagons with 4 horse or ox teams and 2 lighter vehicles. And Nancy Wilmeth drove her own wagon with 1 big horse the entire way.
And would you like to know what she had in that wagon?
I do.
So Nancy Wilmeth was an expert weaver. And so she had all of her spinning supplies in there. She had her weaving board in there. She also brought with her special silkworms. And behind the wagon, she led her special goats. So that she could get her wool and her threads and things. And so that's what she wasn't leaving it behind.
I see in here that she also brought mulberry saplings. I didn't know that. We have mulberries on our property.
Yes. That was for the silkworms.
So,
yeah.
I did not know that.
It's the things you learn on Historified.
Right?
Even in the middle of Historified.
Right. Because I didn't know that.
It says here that 10-year-old Jim Wilmeth rode horseback with the whole way, driving 100 sheep, from which they could make woolen clothing. I cannot imagine.
And then I do know that they actually didn't come to McKinney first. They went to Dallas.
They did go to Dallas first, yeah. Yeah, and they actually set up a homestead in Dallas, and they lived there for a while. They got their fields in, and their fields started to grow, and then they were attacked by a tribe of Indians, and the Indians actually were more scared of Nancy, I think.
She was little, but she was fierce.
Oh, she was feisty. And the men were very disheartened, and they said that they were going to move back to Tennessee. And little Nancy Wilmeth sat down on a log, crossed her arms, and said, "I am not leaving. You can go back, but me and my children are staying here." And so that eventually led them to the McKinney area.
It
wasn't McKinney at
Peters,
a time.
Right? Peters Colony.
Peters Colony. And with Peters Colony, you could get, was it 60 acres, or you could buy a certain amount of acres?
Well, for Peters Colony to get people to Texas, a man or family could get 640 acres.
Oh, 604. Okay.
And then a family can get 640. A single man can get 320.
Okay, that's right. That's right. But you had to promise to plant your farm and plant your fields and work the land, and you had to bring a certain amount of, or Peters Colony had to bring a certain amount of people per year. Like in 3 years, they wanted a certain amount of people.
It's really interesting if you look into the history of how people were coming to Texas and what the incentives were. And the reason there is more than one Peters Colony in Texas because it's named after the company that was actually bringing the people and offering the land. So you might see that there's a Peters Colony in Dallas as well. And I think there's a Peters Colony in one other place that I've found. But we're talking, of course, the one that's just north of McKinney.
Yes. And I think Collin McKinney kind of had a deal with Peters Colony because he brought a lot of people to the area. So they ended up moving here. Mr. Wilmeth had a lot of different jobs. He, at one time in Arkansas, was their main tax assessor. He was a teacher. He was a preacher. He and Collin McKinney were best friends, and they started the first church here in McKinney.
I think he was a blacksmith as well.
He was a blacksmith as well. Yeah, he was. So, 2 miles north of McKinney, they set up their homestead. He brought books with him for teaching because he thought education was really important, and he had actually written his own math book, which I've seen some digital copies of. It's kind of a little hard to read, but it's very interesting. It's a very long book that he wrote.
You know, they were really, really, again, really important in McKinney. I think J.B. Wilmeth just had, when you said everything that he did, and he did multiple things here in McKinney. And he had a very strong voice in the community as well. But the one thing that we really honor here at Chestnut Square is the fact that he did start the first free school in Collin County. So what we might mean by free is that actually schools back then could have charged, and they were not cheap for these farming families at all. They would take a considerable amount of money from the parents of the children to go to school. And so a lot of children wouldn't even go to school. So he and Nancy both felt that education was important for boys and girls. And so he started the first free school.
And because they basically brought 22 kids with them, which is
there's a school.
There's its own school right there. They opened up their home, and they offered it to anybody who wanted to send their children to school. I know his older children actually took an active part in helping them educate the children around Collin County once Collin County was formed. And they opened their home for it, which is amazing. When they built a new home, they built a second story, and that was for the school children. And so Nancy, along with raising all of her children, probably helped to raise other children as well, all while she was taking care of the home and doing her weaving, because she actually would take the wool or take the silk, spin it on her spinning wheel, weave it into cloth, and then take that cloth and make her children's clothing and her family's clothing.
We have a picture somewhere of one of her sons wearing his suit.
I think it's in here, actually. Here it is. It's James Wilmeth. I'm going to show you the picture.
Back then, of course, you're going to a new area and you're a pioneering family. You've got to have these skills. There were no stores here yet. They were literally starting the community.
So this is James Wilmeth, our Wilmeth, and this is a wool suit that Nancy made literally from scratch. So it's amazing. I wish we had this suit.
Yeah, so it just shows you the skills that these people had. And again, their contribution to McKinney is felt everywhere. There's now a Wilmeth school named after them.
Yes.
There's a Wilmeth Road. You can see the name here and there all throughout McKinney.
There was a Wilmeth colony as well.
Okay.
They actually gave land away for the Scott Cemetery that's just off Wilmeth Road and Ridge Road now. They gave that land. So they were very important. And the thing that they felt about education, and that education still today, is that an educated society is a better society. And so they really felt that they were helping educate the children of McKinney so that their lives could be better and so that they could come back to help McKinney to grow and be better. So it was that's why they did it. They really felt that and that women needed to be educated as well, that the mothers of the mothers of the children of the future needed to be educated so that they could help them grow. Like I said, an educated society helps everybody.
And they didn't teach just like little subjects in there. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to plant corn. I mean, they were like really serious subjects. Like you said, he wrote a math book. They taught Latin, geometry. There was a whole list of it. And it's crazy what they learned back then. I didn't even learn some of that in school now. The things that they were teaching, the subjects, the variety of subjects that they were teaching in their schools was just, it's incredibly impressive.
And at such a young age. Like, we have a copy of the 8th grade graduation because they graduated in 8th grade back then. And then they would go and make the decision whether or not they wanted to go on to high school or they wanted to just go out into the world, because by the time they had their 8th grade education, they were ready. And I can tell you, I would have a hard time passing that 8th grade graduation. And I mean, I have a master's degree, so but the rigor and what they taught back then and how seriously those children must have felt about their education is just a testament to those people, because you had to know like in-depth geometry and in-depth civics and government and how the world worked, and math that would allow you to run your own shop or run your own blacksmith shop. It's very impressive. I wish that we could teach that way again.
It is. And what else is impressive is our actual schoolhouse.
Yes.
So we have a replica schoolhouse. It is the only building on our grounds that is a replica of the 1892 Wilmeth Schoolhouse that sat about 2 miles down Highway 5, kind of where the golf course is right now. And that's where the schoolhouse sat. So we have the replica. We were able to make it from pictures that we have of the actual schoolhouse. And it is identical. I think that whoever designed it and built for our village did a tremendous job. And so you can go in there and see what it was like to be at a one-room schoolhouse. And this schoolhouse in particular ran until the 1920s.
Yes, I think the school district absorbed it in 1925, in September of 1925. And not only did JB and Nancy teach in it, but his children came back and taught in it as well, and his grandchildren. So they were a very important family.
When the Civil War broke out, the school, I think that was the only time the school was not in session. The school stopped when the Civil War happened. All the men had to go off to fight. And then when they came back, they actually started the school in one of the sons' houses. So, and
I think it was Jim's house.
Okay. You could just see how what they were doing. They did everything that they could during the time of when it was happening to keep education going. I mean, granted, they had to stop during the Civil War years, but as soon as the war was over and everybody was back home and things were getting back to normal, that school picked right back up.
Yes, it did. And speaking of Jim, he wanted all 5 of his daughters to be college educated. And so, again, he kind of took after his father with that concept. It says here that Jim felt so strongly that he wrote, "In behalf of women voting, there is a much larger portion of moral virtue in that sex than among men, and that they are being dependent on." So he really wanted women to be independent. And when we did start to vote, he wanted us to be educated enough to vote because we had moral virtue.
And another thing they said, they were just very open to the community all across the board. Didn't matter your race or your religion, that you were welcomed at Jim's table.
Yes.
And he was very strong about that.
They were really open. They welcomed everybody at their table. He had very close relationships with ex-slaves. He had very close relationships with the Indians around, because there were still Indians around this area, and Jim did not take on a sense of that they were enemies. nobody was an enemy to him. And so he opened his door, he opened his school to those close relationships with people that were different than himself.
Mm-hmm. But again, you have to come and see our one-room schoolhouse. One-room schoolhouses have been, gosh, I think they were even one-room schoolhouses in the country all the way into the 1940s. Mm-hmm. And so, they played another important part for education for the youth in that community. And I love our schoolhouse, and there's a lot of little fun facts that when you come and tour the schoolhouse that you would learn. Now, we're talking about, of course, how the Wilmeths were forward-thinking and wanted everybody to come, but that didn't mean that they weren't strict. They had some strict policies to teach the youth of the past. All the school kids that come when we have our school tours, they always love the schoolhouse. It's every time I ask them, what was your favorite place to go? They're always like, I love the schoolhouse.
I think half of that is because it's air conditioned and they get to sit down.
It is nice to have a climate controlled
and
building.
A place to sit. It's one of the buildings that all the other buildings were like, don't sit on that. Don't sit on that. But in the schoolhouse, they get to come in and they get to sit down.
And it is one of the buildings that is climate controlled. Not all of our historic buildings are. But they still love it. And to hear the differences of the school, how it was and how it is now. I think the schoolhouse of all the buildings really helps the children kind of like connect
they can relate.
The history. Because they're in school. And then you're like, oh, well, you wouldn't be doing this in school. Oh, you'd be learning this. After 8th grade, you would graduate and you could go off to college and you could figure out what you want to do. And they're like, really? And I'm like, really? Yes, you would. Right?
Yeah, and they love because I do the schoolhouse a lot. They love when I talk about the discipline. Their eyes get really wide. They're shocked at some of the disciplinary actions that were taken.
I don't know if love would be. I mean, they find it funny because it's not happening now. But the things that they did,
During that time, boys and girls, they would come through different doors. Actually, and they'd sit on opposite sides of the room because they separated them by girls and boys. And so if a boy got a little chatty, they would have to wear a girl's bonnet. That was one of the disciplines, and they laugh at that. They just roar. And if a girl was too talkative, she was sent to go sit with the boys. Now, I'm sure some boys got to sit on the girls' side, but it was just, mortifying. That's one of my favorite things on Anne of Green Gables is that that was discipline. She had to go sit with the boys. And so that actually happened. And another thing that they would do for the girls is if they had very long hair, they would take their braids and they'd put a nail in the chalkboard and they'd put their braid over that nail. And then you'd have to stand on your tiptoes and your calves would pretty much start burning. And then if they went down, to give their calves a break, it would yank on their hair. And so the other thing that they would do for the boys, because the boys didn't really get out of it totally, is they would draw a circle on the board and they'd have to go up on their toes to keep their nose in the circle. And so that was some of the disciplinary things that they would do because there were 7 grades of students being taught at the same time. And all those children being taught at the same time. And there was only one teacher. And I always tell the kids, could they email your mom to come get you? No. Could they text? No. Could she go out on the porch and scream, Robbie's mother, Robbie's being needs to come, you need to come discipline him. No, because it was in the middle of nowhere. And so they used their imagination with some discipline because you can't just yell at the children. But then, we talk about what are some other things that are in there.
We had done an exhibit a couple years ago about the schoolhouse, the one-room schoolhouse, where we focused on the kids, and then we focused on the teachers' lives. And in one of the resources I looked at, our schoolhouse is set up how every schoolhouse would have been. So we've got a picture of George Washington in the front right-hand corner. And that was very typical of the one-room schoolhouse. Next to George Washington is the American flag, also in the corner, usually the right corner of the schoolhouse in the front by the chalkboard. But we also have a stool with a dunce cap. And I don't know if you do this when you do school tours, but when I'm in the schoolhouse for a school tour, I have many children, and I can only pick one that wants to model the dunce cap.
Yeah.
So I will, pick one, and they can come up and sit on the stool, and they get the dunce cap on their head. And the dunce was usually used if you didn't do your homework. So because a dunce basically meant dummy.
Yes.
And if you didn't do your homework, you were not going to gain the smarts. You are not going to gain the knowledge that you needed in life. And you're going to go through life as a dummy. So that was the idea of the dunce cap. It really was, the discipline was really based on more like embarrassment.
Right.
And back then, I think it was taken a lot more seriously. You didn't want to be embarrassed.
No.
And you definitely didn't want to get word back to your mom that you were misbehaving at Miss Johnson's class or whatever. It just wasn't heard of.
Do you want to hear a fun fact?
I do.
Then maybe if you're on Jeopardy someday, this might be helpful, and then, give me a couple dollars.
A little bit of your earnings.
The dunce cap was invented. I looked up the history of the dunce cap. That's just fun things that I get to do. And the dunce cap was invented by a man who felt that if he had that cone shape and he put it on his head, that all of the knowledge of the world would come to the point of that dunce cap and then filter down and fill his head with knowledge. So
I have a lot to say about that.
The inventor of the dunce cap was actually kind of a dunce himself. And so the kids all laugh when I tell them that.
That is really funny.
You were supposed to actually be getting knowledge when wearing the dunce cap, but now it has taken on a new meaning.
That's really funny.
Of dumb. So I tell the kids, if you sat in the corner with the dunce cap on and your sister was in the class and you're sitting there with this dunce cap on, guess who found out right away? And they'd all say, Mom and Dad. Yep, because they'd go home. So my father, my grandmother was a teacher, and she taught in a one-room schoolhouse. But my father, my parents grew up in a very small town, and when my dad would get in trouble, he had a cousin who would run home and tell my grandmother. So not only would he get it from, because they had nuns, so he'd get discipline from the nun, he would get discipline from my grandmother immediately when he got home, and then when my grandfather came home, he'd get it again. So I don't know why my dad ever acted up, because he knew that his cousin was going to run home and tattle on him, and that
he had to learn to run faster.
I guess, yeah.
That's the key.
To take her out.
Learn faster. Run faster than your cousin. But another interesting fact about the one-room schoolhouse is we do have a piano in there. I do get asked about the piano a lot. And so the one-room schoolhouse, the school was not just used for school in the town. It was also a meeting place where they would have town meetings. They could have plays in there and speeches, and so that's why the piano would be in there as well. Now I did see that the Wilmeths taught music, but also in any towns it was just a multi-purpose building that
and
the
sometimes
teacher,
churches would meet in there, church meetings.
That the teacher was needed. The teacher themselves were responsible for the schoolroom. So,
and then let's see. Oh, still discipline. The ultimate discipline, of course, that we have, that we pull down and we tell the kids about, is the paddle.
Oh, of course, yeah.
As a last resort, they would get paddled, and the teachers' heads, their eyes just get big, and they're like, see, kids, you can have it worse. And I also tell them that in the state of Texas, corporal punishment is still an option if your parents say that they can. I don't think that many schools around here would even do that. They don't offer it, but it's still, they haven't taken it out of the books yet.
Well, thank you for that tidbit.
Yeah.
Annie.
Nobody does it anymore, but I remember growing up in the 70s and the 80s, my brother, the PE teacher was the one that would do it, and my brother did get licks. That's what they called it. He'd get spanked with that paddle. I, of course, never saw the end of a paddle because I was, I didn't. No, it took a look, and I would probably get it. I would probably, if a teacher gave me a look, I would stop doing whatever I was doing, but so that was the discipline part. And then we have an interesting box that's on the wall.
That's my favorite part of the schoolhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things, like when you've been in there, what are some of the things that the kids say is in that box? Have you ever asked them?
Well, no, they usually ask me. They usually ask me what's in the box up there.
Right. Some kids have said, there's another paddle up there. I've told them that that's where the teacher locked the really, really bad kids.
Oh, jeez.
Just as a joke. They like that. But actually, Jamie, what is in the box?
So what's interesting is that it is a little wooden box. It sits right above the chalkboard, right in the middle, and it's locked. So it is actually the most expensive item back in the day in a schoolhouse, and that is a map, because they were all hand-drawn.
Mm-hmm. And so we tell the kids, and also paper back then was very expensive. Mm-hmm. You couldn't just go to Walmart and get a pad of paper. You had to make your own paper. So paper was expensive, and the maps were hand-drawn, and we tell them that if those maps get ruined because they have another meeting or something in there, that's why they were locked up, it would take a long time to get another map drawn.
And as a matter of fact, when the school first started, I mean, paper was just, you couldn't get it. So they would write on slates, and it wasn't until the railroad came that they were able to do more paper, pen, and ink. And a lot of our desks have like the little ink wells still in them. The kids find that really fascinating.
Yes.
And that's because then we were able to get supplies. But you would see, once you walk into our schoolhouse, I think it just brings a lot of people back easily. Even if you've never been and never been taught in a one-room schoolhouse, I just feel like that image is just ingrained in people.
Yeah.
Like it's just, you walk in and I don't know why, it's just like, oh yeah.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have come in, the parents, the chaperones. Some grandparents chaperone school trips, and they've even said, oh, I went to school in a one-room schoolhouse. Yeah. So there's still people that grew up in one-room schoolhouses.
I think they get a kick out of, when I do talk to the school kids, I'll just bring up one more thing. And I talk about how the one-room schoolhouse was, there were still one-room schoolhouses into the 1940s. And that's because my mom, who wouldn't be very old, she actually had gone to a one-room schoolhouse, at least at one point. So not very long, but yeah, it's...
my grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse until she got married. Yeah,
it's crazy. It's just, it's just a part of the education system just as it moved along.
Yep.
So, and we have one.
Here, at Chestnut Square.
At Chestnut Square. We have a replica, but it's amazing.
Yes.
With a lot of things in there true from the time. So you'll definitely want to check it out.
Definitely. And so that is the story of the Wilmeths goes on and on. So we've had some Wilmeths come back and share some of their stories with us. So if you went to school here in McKinney in a one-room schoolhouse, or your grandparents did, or you even have pictures, again, please, we would love for you to share them with us. You can share them on Facebook with us, Instagram with us. You can bring them by. We would love to talk to you in the office and give you a private tour of this one-room schoolhouse. But yeah, I just find it fascinating. And anybody who has stories about the Wilmeth family or relatives of the Wilmeths actually, there are Wilmeths that married McKinneys. There are Wilmeths that married Fairs. So please, we would love any stories of of any of the educators in the past.
Yeah, and don't forget, we have tours every Thursday and Saturday at 11 a.m. To where you can come in and you can see some of our historic buildings. So you would be able to come in, and at any given month, we do rotate our buildings. The schoolhouse would be on, and it doesn't hurt. You can always just call ahead for that month and just say, hey, what buildings do you have on tour this month? And we'd be able to tell you, and you would be able to come in for a tour and see inside our one-room schoolhouse as well as 3 other of our historic buildings.
So if you have a story of the one-room schoolhouse or the Wilmeth family or any history in McKinney, please drop us a line on our Facebook page. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
Subscribe here on YouTube.
Get all your friends and family to subscribe. And until next time, we will see you in September. Have a good day.
Bye.
Good.